It is so easy for us to become infatuated with or impressed with people. Whether it's a celebrity we admire, an athlete, a politician. I think we all have people that we get excited about, root for, or otherwise cheer for. We just admire them. I mean, I know that's true of me, but I can tell you this. As much as there are people that I admire, I will ultimately follow Jesus. Jesus is my leader. My hope is not in a politician, is not in an athlete, is not in a celebrity. The singular goal that I want is to follow Jesus more. I hope that I can follow him better this year than I did last year, because I know that when I do, it will help me with every other one of my goals. Whether it's a family goal, a work goal, a health and fitness goal, I know that by following Jesus first, I will be better equipped to reach all of those other goals. When we make following Jesus our ultimate goal, when we affirm that we want to be a better follower of Jesus Christ, it will make us better people. It'll do something else too. Satan will put a bullseye right on our backs. He does everything he can to tempt us, to trick us, and to trip us up. I heard about a preacher who was passing the leadership baton to a new generation. The older guy was passing it on to the younger preacher, and he told him, "Son, listen, you're going to make a mistake in this position. It's inevitable. When you do, I've prepared these 3 envelopes for you. Just open them one at a time in succession, in the right order, and you'll be okay." 3 months later, the church was having a financial challenge, and the people were kind of upset with them. And so the young preacher went to those envelopes, and he opened the first one. It simply said 2 words, "Blame me." So he got up in the pulpit next Sunday, and he just blamed the old preacher. He said, "Listen, he left things in terrible shape. I've tried to fix it, but it takes longer. He just left a financial mess." And the church forgave him. Well, about 6 months later, attendance started to go down. It was, in fact, rapid decline. And he didn't know what to do, so he got out that second envelope. It said, "Blame the board." So Sunday he gets up in the pulpit, and I don't know how he got the courage to do this, but he said, "Listen, it's the elders. They don't innovate. They don't let me try new things. It's really their fault we're not growing, not mine." And the people forgave him. They gave him more time. Well, time goes by, and about a year later, this young preacher gets the idea of changing the church service times. That's just something you don't do. If you change the time, there are always going to be people who won't be happy about it. You're not going to please everyone. And he got the church in a bit of an uproar, and the people weren't happy. When he started to realize, he went and he got that 3rd envelope. He opened it, simply said, "Prepare 3 envelopes." Now, I was thinking about that. That's my culture. We are so adept and so proficient in the blame game. Leaders only want to take responsibility for things that go well, when things succeed. They rarely, if ever, want to take responsibility for bad things that happen, for failures. That's not a new phenomenon. In the Garden of Eden, we have 2 people on earth, Adam and Eve. And Adam pointed his finger at Eve. Eve pointed his finger at Satan. And if anything, the tension has just gotten worse since then. I think it's really important for us to realize right up front that the problems we primarily face are not out there. They're right in here, inside of every human heart. Since Adam and Eve first sinned in the Garden of Eden, we have continued that process, and we've gotten a little more proficient at it. War has been waging around the globe ever since the Garden of Eden. Even today, we are at war with God. It's not a war we can win, but we are at war with him. Our behavioral choices every day indicate to him and to the world watching us that we sometimes think that we know better than God. Sometimes we think we've got a better solution than the God of this universe. But let me remind you that 3,500 years before scientists discovered germs, God was telling his people, the people of Israel, you need to wash your hands before you eat. So whether it's personal hygiene, the structure of government, your personal finances, he knows what's best. We're also at war with each other. We don't naturally get along very well with other people, primarily because of our selfishness and sinfulness. We have a hard time working together with other people. We definitely have a hard time serving one another. We need to learn to see other people not as a means to get something from, but as people we can give something to. And we have a hard time with that. Sadly, we're at war with ourselves. Whether you feel it or not, there is this war that wages within us. Sometimes we are our own worst enemies. I know I am. I went to college in Cincinnati. Cincinnati is the world headquarters for Kroger's, and their stores out there used to be the innovators of all of the rest of the country's stores. That's where they tried new things. And long before Costco and Sam's Club came along, Kroger's in Cincinnati used to give out food and drink samples to their customers. And one day, someone from Kroger's was going door to door to door throughout the dormitories trying to find people, recruit people to work for them to hand out these food samples. About 15 of us from the dorm I was in actually got a job at Kroger's for a short time serving people food. I mean, we were doling out pieces of lasagna and cheesecake. One Saturday, the manager came to me and he gave me this giant jug of Hi-C, fruit punch. I loved that stuff as a kid, but my mom would never buy it for us. So for every Dixie cup I gave out of this Hi-C to a customer, I drank about 17 more myself. I mean, I'm going up and down the aisles, looking around, making sure no one's watching me and going all over the place, drinking these, just chugging them, you know. I mean, I had a drinking problem. And I tell you just to say this, there are some addictions that are harmless on some level, but most addictive tendencies that all of us share are at some level very detrimental. We all are prone to some sort of addictiveness, and it puts us at war with ourselves. Last but not least, we're at war with nature. Don't believe me? Go to the zoo and try to pet a lion. Hug a cobra. The next time you are in a tornado, try to outrun it. Outswim a tsunami. The next time you get a cancer diagnosis or a diabetes prognosis, just ignore it. Pretend it's not there. And see what happens, right? It feels like the whole created world has indigestion, and humanity is the source of the heartburn. So we see all four of these wars around us, and you can look in Scripture and you can see in a way they kind of all collide in Mark chapter 4. Jesus and his disciples are getting in a boat. They're getting ready to cross to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus comes on board with a pillow while each of his disciples has a life jacket around their necks. And Mark tells us that when they get about halfway across the Sea of Galilee, a storm just takes over the boat and engulfs their boat. Your Bible probably uses these words in the translation, fierce storm. Another translation, violent storm. That's technically a pretty good translation because Mark very carefully chose two Greek words to describe this storm, and you probably recognize the source of these Greek words, mega, seismos. Megaseismos, these are the Greek words to describe the catastrophic scope of the storm that is engulfing this boat with Jesus and his disciples on the Sea of Galilee. Here's what we know for sure about the storm. The boat is filling up with water. These 12 disciples are terrified. They're petrified of drowning. Meanwhile, their closest friend, Jesus, is in the back of the boat, fast asleep. And at some point, one of these disciples very wisely says, we ought to go wake him up. They go back there and they tap him on the shoulder. Hey, boss, we could use your help right now. And Jesus walks up to the front of the boat. And he looks out at this massive storm. The wind is howling and the waves are crashing. The storm is thundering and the rain is just pouring down. And Jesus goes, shh. And everything goes calm. the storm subsides. And in that moment, the disciples go from being petrified of the storm to being terrified of Jesus. And one of them says, "Who is this man that even the waves obey him?" That question is the most important question you or I will ever answer. Who is this man? And the answer that you give to that question is going to determine a lot about the quality of the rest of your life. You might recall the name Enrico Fermi, the scientist who first split the atom successfully. Today we call it nuclear fission. But the impact of this guy's discovery really wasn't felt until the United States military dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. In that moment when this bomb exploded, the core of it reached several million degrees Celsius. 66,000 people were instantaneously vaporized. 6 miles away, buildings were completely leveled. And get this, they say that the glare from this explosion was so bright, it could be seen 390 million miles away from the planet Jupiter. As staggering as those statistics are, what is almost incomprehensible is the fact that that all came from 1/3 of an ounce of uranium. See, Mr. Fermi discovered that there's a ton of energy in a very small amount of matter. Okay, Randy, why'd you tell us this? You want to know what's even more incomprehensible? I want your mind to begin to think about the God who created all matter. The God who invented every single invisible atom. The God who created the scientist who invented or who first discovered the atom. The God who stood in the front of a boat and told the wind and waves to settle down, and they did. See, who we fear, who we really fear, will determine what we fear and what we don't fear in this life. Our tendency, I think, is sometimes to see Jesus as just a little bit bigger than we are, a little better than us, a little stronger than us, and that is a terribly calculated mistake on our part when we do it. I remember years ago watching the movie Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Remember that movie? Rick Moranis plays this nerdy inventor who created this invention, this huge contraption, and when he pointed it at something, the rays would come out and just shrink something big into something little. In the American church, it's almost like we've had this attempt, and I use that word attempt very intentionally, attempt to downsize the creator of the universe. And it's just not wise. Open up your Bible, and the very first words are these: in the beginning, God created. It's the Hebrew word bara, created. Hebrew theologians refer to this whole concept as ex nihilo, out of nothing. My guess is somewhere, you've heard somewhere along the line, someone will say, I just made these cookies from scratch. Or I made this soup from scratch. But the reality is they made those cookies or that soup from something, right? They had ingredients. They put those ingredients together. But the Bible is claiming that God made everything out of nothing. That's quantitatively different, right? Old-time preacher J. Vernon McGee said, this is God's universe, and God does things his way. You might have a better way of doing things, but you don't have a universe. And this is an important distinction for all of us to make. What we do with this big God up there impacts a whole lot about what we do down here. So let me take you back. What causes you to put on a life jacket? What in your life right now are you worried about? Is it growing old? The aches and pains that come along with that? The cost of health care? Maybe for you, is it the idea of being single and lonely? Or married and miserable? I'm just kidding. Maybe you're thinking about your kids and your grandkids and the state of our country and what it's going to be like in 10 years, and it just keeps you up at night. Scientists have discovered there are 785 distinct phobias in the world today. 785. And every one of us, they tell us, has at least one of them. We all have a major fear. Maybe you've already identified in your life. For some, it's the fear of snakes. Maybe it's the fear of spiders. Maybe it's the fear of public speaking or swimming in deep water where you can't see the bottom. Maybe you're just afraid of the dark. But scientists have also discovered that inside each of us, literally, is a worry gene. There's a literal gene called a worry gene. They have a scientific name for it, SLC6A4. It's the SLC6A4 gene, and it's on chromosome 17q12, for those of you who care. The shorter version of this is a predisposition to worry. How many of you are now worried that maybe you have this gene? When I was a youth minister, I used to teach my teenagers. I'd have part of my weekly class routine is I would give them a definition of a word. It may not have had anything to do with the lesson, but every week I wanted them to learn a new definition for a word. And one of those that I remember most is the word obedience. Here was the definition I gave them, and I still like this definition. I trust God to decide for me. So in other words, when I obey God, I'm saying to him and to everyone else around me, I believe that God knows what is best for me. God knows what I should do even when I don't know what I should do. Maybe more importantly, God knows what I should do even when I think I should do something else. Scientists have debated this whole concept and idea for centuries. Albert Camus once said, "Life is the sum of all your choices." There's some wisdom to that. Columbia University did a study a while back, and they determined that the average person makes, on average every day, 70 big decisions. 70 big decisions a day. That means at the end of your life, for the average person, you would have made 1.8 million choices. And some of those choices are important. They determine the quality and the direction of your life. But what if you just made one decision at the outset of every day? And that decision was, today, I'm going to follow Jesus. More specifically, I'm going to obey Jesus. That would help you make the rest of your decisions all throughout the day. What's that mean? Jesus, you're deciding for me. And he's already decided what your marriage should look like. He's already decided what your personal finances should look like. He's already decided how you should treat people, even your enemies. So you wake up every day and you say, Jesus, I'm going to obey you just like the wind and the waves obey you. And what happens in your life when you choose to do that? There's a doctor by the name of Evan Kane in the 1920s. This guy performed 4,000 appendectomies on people. He was the one who famously said and told other doctors, at some point we have to get away from knocking patients out all the time. He said we can use local anesthesia on a lot of these little surgeries. His colleagues didn't necessarily disagree with him, but they wanted to see some data behind his idea before they tried it on people. So Dr. Kane finally found someone who would let him operate on them with just a local anesthesia. Here's a picture of the surgery, and what you're going to see in it is Dr. Kane is operating on himself. His appendix was giving him fits, so he gave himself a local anesthetic, and he removed his own appendix. The doctor became the patient. Why? so that he could help future patients. He really thought it was best to quit knocking people out all the time. And I read through that story and I thought, that is exactly what this big God, this creator of the universe, did. In the incarnation, he became human. He experienced pain so that he could end pain once and for all. So we're talking about God. We're talking about this gigantically huge, big God, but we're not talking about a God who is distant from suffering. We're not talking about a God who is distant from temptation. We're not talking about a God who is distant from stress. No, Jesus showed us in his own life that he was bigger than our biggest fear and stronger than our weakest moment. That's why in that boat the disciples shake him and wake him up. They have already seen what he's capable of doing. They had heard him teach, and they're like, we need you right now. I don't know what they thought. Maybe they thought that he could just transport them a little quicker across the sea. Maybe they thought he could calm them down miraculously. I don't think they ever thought he could tell the wind and the waves to be still, and they just would. They needed him at that moment, and you need him now. It doesn't matter if the storm is big or small. The best decision that you can make is to invite Jesus into your storm. Because when you do, you're tapping into a power that you don't have. A power that can tap into the miraculous. And when Jesus performs miracle, what he's doing, he's pulling back the curtain and giving us a preview of coming attractions. He's showing us a restored reality, a better reality. In his book, The Jesus I Never Knew, Philip Yancey just, I think, nailed it with this thought that I had never thought of before, but I think he's absolutely right. He said, to put it mildly, God is no more satisfied with this earth than we are. Jesus' miracles offer a hint of what God intends to do about it. Some see miracles as an implausible suspension of the laws of the physical universe. However, they are the exact opposite function. Death, decay, entropy, and destruction are the true suspensions of God's laws. Miracles are the early glimpse of his restoration. So with that in mind, let me take you back to this three-envelope idea. I'm up here on this stage today, roofs over my head, outdoors, it's cold, but it's nice and warm in here. Healthy body, positive outlook. I could lull myself into believing a lie we're all capable of believing, that there's no storm coming our way, right? I could think, there's no storm on my horizon, but it wouldn't be true. Storms are always brewing. And when the next storm hits my life, I'm going to have three possible responses. Right out of the gate, when that storm comes, I could blame others. I could point my finger at my boss. I could point my finger at the government. I could point my head to some guy with silly ears in the front row. I could point my finger at my spouse, my kids, my friends, my circumstances. I could point my finger all over the place. They're the cause of the way my life turned out. Or I could blame God. I could say, what a cosmic bully. He's up there like some puppet master sending people my way to beat me up or beat me down. So many times we blame God for our circumstances. Or a better response, I could take responsibility. I could literally, mentally, emotionally, physically recognize that all of the chaos and confusion in this world partially falls on me for blame. I sin. So anytime there's a cancer diagnosis or a car accident or depression or an addiction struggle, it's not just that person's problem. Just like Adam and Eve, I'm to blame. And by the way, so are you. Because the problem isn't out there. The problem is in here. And the only person that can calm the storm in here and around me and out there is Jesus. One author nailed it. There's only two things you can control when your storm strikes: your attitude toward the storm and your actions during the storm. So this year, 2025, what past pain continues to wreak havoc in your life? What current frustration causes your pulse to go faster when you think about it? What future worry are you wrestling with on a regular basis that causes you to just lose all of your joy and peace? And while you're thinking about those, I want to put two options in front of you. A lot of people live with a permanent life vest on. Fear causes people to live in what I have heard called practical atheism. Practical atheism. Even Christians say they believe in God, but their fear robs them of their actual trust in God. Here's the way this sounds. God does not exist. It's just foolish to think that an all-powerful God brings redemption to the pain and suffering in this world is a comforting thought. However, it's only wishful thinking. People can do as they please without consequences. The idea that I'm deserving of hell because of sin is meant to make me a slave to those in power. This is all what practical atheism says. The more you have, the happier you will be. Our existence has no grand meaning or purpose. In a world with no God, there is freedom to be who I want to be. With God, everything's fine. It's ridiculous to think I am lost and in need of a Savior. That's one way to look at life when you're going through a storm. That's one option that's a popular option. You see it in people's behavioral choices, who they choose to obey, who they choose to fear. Now there's another option on the table, and that option is to take the life vest off and to use the pillow. Jesus wants you to have rest, peace, contentment. So I want to read these same words in reverse order, this time from bottom to top. I am lost and in need of a Savior. It's ridiculous to think everything is fine, but with God there is freedom to be who I want to be. In a world with no God, our existence has no grand meaning or purpose. The more you have, the happier we'll be, is meant to make me a slave to those in power. Because I sin, I'm deserving of hell. The idea that people can do as they please without consequences is only wishful thinking. It's a comforting thought, however, in this world that an all-powerful God brings redemption and healing to the pain and suffering of this world. It's just foolish to think God does not exist. So I'm glad he came, so we can take off that life jacket and pick up a pillow and just rest. I'm even more glad that he's coming again to put an end to all of the suffering and destruction and disaster that's around us. I'm glad he's coming again to make everything right. But here's the reality, and we learned this last Sunday. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or a non-Christian. Storms are absolutely positively going to come. And what storms specifically create is stress. So what's your response to the stress going to be? You've heard me quote hundreds of times Max Lucado. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's been referred to as America's pastor, rightfully so. An amazing person, amazing Christian. He leads a great church out in San Antonio, Texas. He's written Christian books that have changed my life. He's sold about 120 million of those copies of books. If there's anyone on this planet that God would have protected from a storm, it's got to have been Max Lucado, right? but he's human. And he too has contributed to the chaos and confusion of those 4 wars. It's because of stress. And so in his life, I think his stress is manifested in a different way, a unique way. He wrote about it. He said, ever since my high school buddy and I drank ourselves sick, I have liked beer. Out of the keg, from the tap, bottle, frosty mug, it doesn't matter to me. I like it. But I also know that alcoholism haunts my family ancestry. I have early memories of my dad through the halls of the rehab center going to see his sister. Similar scenes have repeated themselves with other relatives in my family for decades. Beer doesn't mix well with my family DNA. At the age of 21, I swore it off. Then a few years back, something resurrected my cravings. At some point, I reached for a can of brew instead of a can of soda. And as quick as you can pop a top, I was a beer fan again. A once-in-a-while beer fan, then a once a week, and then a once a day beer fan. He writes, I kept my preferences to myself. No beer at home, lest my daughters think less of me. No beer in public. I mean, who knows who might see me. None at home, none in public. That leaves one option. Convenience store parking lots. For about a week, I was the guy in the car drinking out of a brown paper bag. Now, I don't know what kick-started my cravings, but I remember what stunted them. En route to speak at a men's retreat, I stopped for my daily purchase. I walked out of the convenience store with the bag of beer pressed against my side, scurried to my car in hopes that no one would see me. I opened the front door, climbed in, and opened the can, and then it dawned on me I had become the very thing I hated most in life, a hypocrite, a pretender, two-faced, acting one way, living another. I had written sermons about people like me, Christians who cared more about appearance than integrity. It wasn't the beer, but the cover-up that nauseated me. Stress, something triggered it in his life. I get all that, don't you? Stress can sneak up on all of us and consume us if we let it. Listen, the goal of this entire 4-week series of messages, studying the very words of Jesus about the storms in our life, is simple and important. When the stress comes, when the storms hit, instead of turning to food for comfort, or alcohol, or social media, or someone close to you, our goal is to turn to Jesus. He's our best option, and he should be our first option. And I'll tell you more about it next week.